Castlevania is a series I've always had an interest in ever since I was young. While I've interacted with Castlevania related media over the years, whether it was YouTube videos, the Netflix anime, or even something like playing as Simon and Richter in Smash Bros, I've never actually played a Castlevania game before. The closest I've ever come to playing a Castlevania game was playing 3 games inspired by the series, all of them being from Inti Creates: Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 1 and 2, and Gal Guardians Demon Purge. That was until a couple of weeks ago. Recently, I bought Castlevania Requiem, which includes Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night. As someone who always wanted to get into the series, this collection was perfect, as it was mostly these 2 games I've heard the most about over the years. So starting with 1993's Rondo of Blood, these were my first steps into Castlevania. Castlevania Rondo of Blood was released for the PC Engine's Super CD-ROM system add-on. The console was a major success in Japan, going as far as to rival the Super Famicom, yet failed to have the same presence in America. While it's not certain, this could be the reason Rondo of Blood wasn't released in America up until 2008 on Wii Virtual Console, completely untranslated. The version in the Requiem collection not only is fully translated, but has also been dubbed over. I don't personally mind the voice acting, but sometimes the voices aren't synced with the mouths, and it does bother me a bit. The year is 1792. Dracula has been resurrected, and his castle has taken form once again. Dracula sends his forces to a nearby village, and they end up kidnapping 3 young women, one of which being Annette, the girlfriend of a young Belmont, Richter. Richter suits up and prepares himself for his destiny as a Belmont. The game goes for an anime-esque art style, which is really apparent by the character design, specifically Dracula himself. And other than the Count himself, I actually like the style. Moving on to the gameplay, Richter makes use of the Vampire Killer, the Belmont family heirloom, as his main form of attack. It has pretty decent range, and pressing forward actually extends the whip's reach by a bit, which actually came in handy a lot more than I thought it would. While Richter has very limited control in the air, he does have this backflip he can do. Initially, I thought it was useless, but other than some niche uses throughout the game, it actually makes for a pretty decent evasive maneuver. Lastly, Richter has a variety of sub-weapons, giving him some more versatility. 2 of my favorites are the throwing axes and the Bible. They cost hearts to use, and with enough hearts, he can perform an item crash, a super move based on whatever sub-weapon he's holding. Not only do these usually take care of any problem on screen, but most of them give some invincibility frames, which is really helpful in a pinch. With all that said, Richter isn't the only one making his way through Castlevania. In Stage 2, you can rescue a young girl named Maria Renard, who also tried fighting her way through Dracula's army. She's a relative of the Belmont, and heard of Richter from Annette, Richter's kidnapped girlfriend. Maria acts as a faster paced alternative to Richter, as she not only moves faster than him by default, but she can also move and attack at the same time. She also attacks twice as much as Richter can, sending 2 dubs at a time to deal with foes. In addition to everything I just mentioned, she not only has a slide, giving her even more speed on the ground, but she also has a double jump, which not only makes her much easier to control while airborne, but also gives her the ability to completely bypass some pieces of level design. Her group of sub-weapons are also really good. My favorites are the cat, which runs along the ground, repeatedly bumping into enemies, doing some pretty good damage, and this dragon, because even though it consumes a lot of hearts, it does some crazy damage, while also covering above her. That just reminded me, Maria is short, so her hitbox is naturally smaller than Richter's. And lastly, by pressing up quarter circle forward and attacking, Maria uses her stand? Well, whatever it is, it does crazy damage, completely trivializing enemies with high health bars and even some bosses. Hey, Editing Sheem here. I know this is kinda abrupt, but I just got done editing the video and I got curious, so I looked at the Castlevania wiki, and according to it, not only is this thing called the Guardian Knuckle, but it is in fact inspired by JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, specifically Jotaro's stand, Star Platinum. So I was right. Thanks for sticking around this far in, and I hope to see you at the end. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that Richter and Maria are playing life on two separate difficulties. And speaking of difficulty, this game is hard. I'll admit, while I've heard the series was difficult, I honestly didn't expect to struggle this much as I did. With Richter, of course, Maria could never. Thankfully, it was just more challenging than anything, and almost all the deaths I suffered from felt like it was my fault. And to answer your question, no, I did not press forward. The stages, although difficult as I mentioned, were fun challenges with a lot to offer. Dracula's castle is definitely diverse in both its scenery and its obstacles. I honestly appreciate the variety of enemies. While some were annoying like these water face things, enemies like the variety of knights and skeletons were really fun to deal with. And even though Richter got the short end of the stick when it comes to control compared to Maria, it doesn't feel like he's ill-equipped for the adventure. The only stage I ended up disliking was stage 4. The game has 12 stages. Starting from the first stage, you can find alternate routes to not only end stages early with a different boss, but also leading to different stages. It's within these alternate stages that you'll find two of the girls Dracula's forces kidnapped, Terra and Iris. While the girls serve as reason to explore the alternate stages, the existence of the stages themselves gives the game some more replayability. You're also able to go back to any stage you've beaten previously to explore whatever you may have missed. Annette is in stage 7, with the key to her cell hidden behind this inconspicuous gear. I mean, you could just go through the stages saving nobody, including Maria, but that's kinda heartless, ain't it? Back on the topic of the stages, specifically their themes, I honestly didn't expect the soundtrack to be like this at all. Of course, I've heard series staples and fan favorites like Vampire Killer, Bloody Tears, and Divine Bloodlines, but truthfully, aside from these songs, I expected to hear a much more grim and sinister soundtrack, something similar to the song before confronting bosses. But instead, I was met with a really high energy soundtrack. While it was definitely a surprise, it's a welcome one. And while that boss precursor theme I mentioned is one of my favorites, themes like Opus 13 and Slash are undeniably catchy. Finally, moving on to the bosses, these were some of the most challenging points of the game for me. While their attacks for the most part are easy to read, getting hit means losing a lot of your health bar. Some attacks do feel pretty sporadic, and sometimes it feels like some bosses overstay their welcome. And yet, the only boss I didn't like was Camilla, mostly because the girl holding you still gets annoying really quickly. The boss rush by far was the most frustrating part of the game for me. It took me a long time to beat this as Richter. An endurance match with 4 monsters scaling up the difficulty with each one, capping off with another boss fight against Shaft, the Dark Priest who helped aided Dracula's resurrection. Funny enough, I found Dracula himself to be easier than a lot of the bosses throughout the game. Richter's the only one who actually has some difficulty with Dracula, since he's so slow compared to Maria. With Dracula defeated, Richter and Maria make their way home, leaving Castlevania to crumble. For my first traditional Castlevania game, I ended up loving Rondo of Blood. Both Richter and Maria are fun to control, the stages offer fair and diverse challenges, and the music is amazing. There's not much I don't enjoy about the game, and I can definitely understand why it's held in such high regard. But now it's time to take a look at the second half of Castlevania Requiem, Symphony of the Night. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was originally released in 1997 for the PlayStation, with the game later getting a re-release on the Sega Saturn the next year. and eventually ported to the PSP for Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles, which is the version I'll be playing in this video. Before I move on, even if it's a little obvious, there will be spoilers for Symphony of the Night gameplay and story-wise, so this is your warning. The game starts with a reimagining of Richter's fight with Dracula that honestly just serves to show how powerful Richter is, because this is less of a boss fight and more of a one-sided slaughter on Richter's end. 5 years later, in 1795, Richter has gone missing, and Maria Renard doesn't know where to begin looking. That is, until Castlevania materializes itself. Alucard, one of the playable characters in Castlevania 3 and the son of Dracula, awakens from his slumber and rushes towards the castle to investigate. Early on, Death confronts Alucard and steals his equipment, forcing him to use things around the castle. With the story out of the way for now, Alucard is one of the most customizable protagonists I've played as. While Symphony of the Night is Rondo of Blood's direct sequel, it differentiates itself in terms of gameplay and overall level design. The game is an action RPG, meaning that Alucard may level up every once in a while, increasing his stats like his attack and defense, and some extra stats like luck, which affect how much enemies drop items. Alucard's equipment also directly affect his stats. There's a few different type of items, but they can kind of be put into two different categories, on-hand and off-hand items. On-hand items are things like your variety of weapons, like the Jewel Knuckles that just increase Alucard's damage output, or the Heaven Sword, a throwable sword that works best as a secondary weapon in my opinion. There's an abundance of interesting weapons all over the castle. It kinda just comes down if you're willing to explore for them or not. The offhand items include things like different cloaks, pieces of armor, and stone masks that can boost Alucard's stats. They really think they're slick. While enemies can drop items, again, for the most part, items will be found around the castle. Alucard also has access to sub-weapons, some familiar like the axe, Bible, and dagger, and some new, like this really powerful sub-weapon that shoots electricity. Lastly, Alucard has access to a variety of spells, which use fighting game-like inputs and MP to activate. Two of my favorites are Tetra Spirit and Hellfire. When your equipment isn't doing the job good enough, you can somewhat rely on these to kinda pick up the slack. With all this together, and Alucard's backdash that I just now remembered to bring up, Alucard is a joy to control, which makes traversing through the castle fun. Speaking of which, I'd be lying if I said I didn't find the thought of this game initially terrifying. The thought of exploring a giant castle with easy to miss rooms and getting lost with little to no clues on where to go next had me worried that I wouldn't enjoy the game, or at least not on my first playthrough. Thankfully, that wasn't my experience with Symphony of the Night at all. And while I did struggle to find new areas like the Colosseum sometimes, for the most part, I was able to comfortably make my way through the castle. As you make your way through Castlevania, you gain some upgrades and items that are integral to exploring the rest of it, like a double jump, the wolf and bat transformation, and the gravity boots. Finding new areas is really exciting, and the physical and visual distinction make them all a joy to explore in their own right. While areas do share some enemies, there's a lot of enemies unique to an area, like the spell books, skull lords, frogs and toads. Always knew all frogs were evil. Oh, and a lot of the enemies have funny death sounds. The Vandal Sword is probably my favorite. Further exploring these areas doesn't go unrewarded either, as you can find a myriad of items like I mentioned. Some of these items are permanent health upgrades and heart upgrades, increasing their respective reward. While bosses drop health upgrades as well, there's an abundance of them and heart upgrades to find throughout the castle, rewarding your curiosity. There's even some upgrades that can only be found off the main path, further incentivizing exploration. Speaking of exploration, one of my favorite things about this game is that things will just start to click for you. I remember finding this corridor of spikes in the chapel area, and I remember that when I got the bat and mist transformation, I tried to make it through, only to realize that I still couldn't. But when I found the Spike Breaker mail, I instantly knew what its purpose was. There ended up being a lot of moments like that in the game for me, and piecing together what upgrades could be used to reach areas that were previously inaccessible were really fun. Since you'll most likely be exploring certain areas for long periods of time, you'll most likely end up getting a good idea of its music. Just like the areas themselves, the soundtrack is really diverse, with unique compositions and instrumentation throughout. I didn't really feel like exploring the Colosseum after taking out its boss and getting the Mist transformation, but Wandering Ghost made me change those plans. Even on my first playthrough though, I knew The Tragic Prince was gonna remain my favorite song throughout. It easily became my favorite Castlevania song when I heard it. Every now and then, you'll run into Maria Renard, who's still looking for Richter. Eventually, she asks Alucard to tell her if he finds him, and when he does, he's shocked to see that the Belmont is the self-proclaimed lord of the castle. After informing Maria about Richter's status, Maria tests Alucard's strength to see if he's truly ready to take Richter head-on. And with the holy glasses Maria gave him, he's able to break Richter free from his mind control. As it turns out, he was being controlled by Shaft, who died and died again? Anyway, now we got a whole new castle to explore. Except not really, it's just the normal castle, but upside down, and more annoying in almost every way possible. So, the reverse castle, as I mentioned, is the same as the first castle, but alongside being flipped, it's filled to the brim with new enemies, bosses, and hazards. The name of the game is Simon's Quest, collecting 5 pieces of Dracula from 5 bosses. I have 2 big problems with the reverse castle. If it's not the abundance of enemies or hazards that do terrifying amounts of damage, it's moving around the castle itself. The thing is, in most video games, when you have to explore an upside down segment of a stage, while it can be disorienting at points, it at least feels like they were designed with the stage going upside down in mind. Here though, it's like it was an afterthought, probably because it was, but it can be really annoying to get around. One of the best examples is the outer walls. The reliance on super jumps is crazy. And as I mentioned, there are 5 bosses you have to fight, those who specifically are holding pieces of Dracula. The only problem is, there's no way of telling which rooms have the bosses that actually have the pieces, leaving you to explore the castle until you get one of them. Thankfully, the items in the reverse castle make up for this. Once again, things like health and heart upgrades can be found, but it's mostly the equipable items you want to keep your eyes on. I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels like the stuff in the reverse castle is way better than the stuff in the normal one. For example, the stuff Death stole from you, the Alucard gear, can be found throughout the castle, and the random drops are insane. For example, I was initially annoyed that I went into the long library for nothing, until I got this sword, I'm not saying that name. A multi-hit sword that you're able to move and attack with at the same time. If this isn't optimal movement in this game, I don't want to know what is. I also ended up getting a sword called the Mournblade, which gives you HP back for every slash that connects with anything. You can easily become overpowered if you try. So, exploring the reverse castle comes down to if you want to explore the castle more for some extra goodies, or if you don't know where exactly to go. Because, you know, my first few times playing the game. After collecting the 5 pieces of Dracula and heading to the clock room, Shaft explains that the reason he made Richter lord of the castle was because he was the strongest of all the hunters, so no one could stand a chance against him and get in the way of Dracula's resurrection. However, he never plans on Alucard to make an appearance, and shortly after the exchange, Alucard puts an end to Shaft, for good, but not before his father is revived. Dracula, while happy to see his son, is shocked that Alucard is still fighting for the humans, reminding him of what they did to his mother. While Alucard says he could never forget, he also states that he doesn't seek vengeance against them either, and the two clash, with Alucard coming out on top. Alucard tells Dracula the reason he lost is because he lost his soul in search of power, and before he passes on again, he asks his son his wife's final words.
She said, "Do not hate humans. If you cannot live with them, then at least do them no harm, for theirs is already a hard lot." She also said that she would love you for eternity.
Lisa, Forgive me. Farewell, my son.
With Dracula defeated, Castlevania crumbles, and Alucard meets with Richter and Maria, who are waiting for him outside the castle. Alucard ultimately decides that due to his blood, the world would be better off without him, with Richter and Maria returning home. Even though we've reached the ending, we're not done just yet. After beating the game, if you name yourself Richter on a new save file, you'll be able to play as him. His gameplay has been enhanced to better suit the more open-ended design of Symphony of the Night, as he can now run, has fluid and air control, a 2-part slide, and a super jump. He also has this really cool dash attack that he can not only repeatedly use in the air, but also gives him invincibility frames. And unlike Alucard, he has access to the item crashes, making him even more powerful. He doesn't even need the item crashes. He doesn't struggle with killing anything at all. He is a glass cannon though, so you gotta make sure you don't get hit too much. All in all, he's a really fast-paced and powerful alternative to Alucard. You can also play as Maria Renard by typing her name in a new save file. Just like Richter, she plays like a better version of her Rondo of Blood incarnation. She still has her double jump and her slide, which is kinda useless now thanks to one of her new abilities, and she still utilizes birds for her main form of attack. Just like Richter, she now has a super jump that she can actually glide from to help her explore the castle, and alongside this useless spin attack she has this insane dash that while spammable on the ground, gives her crazy horizontal speed in air. They also changed most of her item crashes. For example, the cat now boosts her normal damage instead of being a screen nuke. And trust me, you're going to need that damage boost, because compared to Richter and Alucard, Maria is weak. A lot of enemies and bosses take a tiring amount of time to kill, and her health bar is abysmally low, even lower than Richter's although they look the same. Even then, it's still fun exploring the castle with her. Also, I love that she makes this pose when you're holding up. I don't think there's any RPG elements when you're playing as Richter and Maria, and your only goal is to make it to the room that Shaft is in and beat him. All in all, Symphony of the Night was a game I was originally dreading, not because I thought the game would be bad, but because of my preconceived notions I had about it. Thankfully, the game was an easy in into the Metroidvania genre, and was enjoyable almost the whole way through. It was nice to see the other half of Castlevania games with my second experience. I honestly didn't expect to enjoy the game so much, and I've already replayed it once for this video. I had a lot of fun playing these two games, and if you by chance haven't played these games yourself, I suggest you give them a try. It's nice to have finally played two games from a series that I've been looking at for so long. Thank you so much for staying till the end. I had a lot of fun making this video, and of course playing the games. I'll probably try out some more Castlevania games in the future, but that's it for now. Once again, thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Peace.